Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics and continuing on with the series on what major economies around the world would want to see from a post-Brexit deal with the UK. I'm taking a look at the world's mightiest economy, that of the United States of America. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, unlike with other countries, the task of knowing what the US government would want from Brexit is pretty straightforward. We don't have to try and infer things from what various ministers or civil servants are saying, as the United States government were kind enough to write it down for us and then publish it about a year ago. We also have the leaked records of high-level meetings between the UK and US officials on some of the finer points. Now, the first page in these US proposals includes sections on how the deal should remove barriers to the trading of US exports into the UK. It also talks about improving the competitiveness of US products in the UK market by removing tariffs as well as other measures. What it doesn't do at any point at all is to explain how UK exports will receive enhanced competitiveness in the US market. It sets the scene as a deal which is intended to increase the flow of American exports and nothing else. The second page then goes right into the requirement for the UK to remove regulations and standards which impede certain American products from being traded in the UK. It also suggests that checks of US imports into the UK should be kept to a minimum and generally eliminated altogether. There's also a section about removing the need for labelling on certain products. I mean, there's no need to know what we're really buying, is there? We don't need to know. Page 3 seems vaguely hilarious as it talks about the need for the UK to ensure that the payment of duties is arranged accurately and efficiently, all the rest of it. But the first page was all about removing duties on US exports. So what that must mean then on page 3 when it's talking about the collection of duties, well, those duties don't apply on American exports, so that means they just must apply on British exports. So we see that the deal is for tariffs to be removed from US goods being traded in the UK, but there will still be tariffs on the equivalent UK goods being exported to the US. And that's how it reads. That is the only way to read that. That's a funny old free trade agreement, isn't it? Especially odd as the first line of the document on page 1 is, and I quote, ensure fair, balanced and reciprocal trade with the UK. Now, I'm not sure how demanding no customs duties on your own goods, but imposing them on your agreement partner's goods is in any way reciprocal. Essentially, the US is steering the UK towards not getting a deal with the EU. We know this for two reasons. One, if you read the document, the US proposals make it impossible to have a comprehensive deal with the EU because the standards would be totally incompatible. And secondly, the leaked documents of the talks between the UK and US officials made it clear that the UK understands that the US will not strike a deal with the UK if we have arranged one with the EU. It doesn't even say if we've arranged a comprehensive one with the EU, just any deal with the EU. Now, in a situation where the UK doesn't have a deal with the EU, we will be desperate for something. Boris Johnson has to come up with a deal with someone. Even a bad deal can be sold as a good one to a population that has bought the nonsense of Brexit so far. Bear in mind, you've got a massive chunk of the population that thought Theresa May's withdrawal agreement was absolutely horrendous, terrible, the worst thing ever, worse than staying in the EU. But apparently Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement, which is substantively the same thing, is amazing. Absolutely inspired. Brilliant. And, so the US gets to insist that we accept all of its products. The lack of customs duties will make them much cheaper. That will include products currently below safety standards, which will, of course, be the cheapest of all. The chlorinated chicken, we all know about that. That will potentially appeal to the UK government because it will go some way to compensating for the lack of food that we'd be able to import from the EU due to customs difficulties in the event of not arranging a trade deal and not expanding our border forces, because we're not doing that. If we're going to have to check EU products coming in, we haven't put the facilities in place to do that. The deal goes on to talk about rules of origin, insisting that products are generally made, it uses the word genuinely, made in the UK and the US. That means presumably from start to finish. It doesn't really explain that, but that's what I'm guessing. And that would mean, of course, that many UK products would be ruled out of the trade under this deal, because the US is a much more complete start to finish manufacturing nation. UK manufacturers produce a lot of products that will use some components imported from elsewhere. And that will make those products ineligible under the deal, presumably. And we're not in a position to suddenly manufacture that, expand that manufacturing to the extent needed to supply all of the components needed. So that basically would mean that American companies will gain another competitive advantage over their UK counterparts. On services, it insists that rules will allow for greater access for US suppliers in the UK, but again, no reciprocal commitment. It especially insists on expanding American financial service suppliers in the UK, and that the UK's financial services regulations are knocked on the head to facilitate this. No problem for Boris Johnson there, as he wants to deregulate the financial sector anyway. Possibly a slight problem in that he also wants the UK financial sector to expand, but this deal will shrink it. Not only will we not be able to offer our services as easily in Europe, so we'll lose customers overseas, but the American suppliers would be further encroaching onto the UK suppliers' own patch. So the UK suppliers will lose customers overseas and lose customers based in the UK. So shrink, shrink, shrink. And throughout much of the document, the language used seems fairly inoffensive. You have to actually, when you read a thing, you have to think, okay, so what are the implications of this to really see what it's about? But the section on investment is really explicit. I'll read it out. Secure for US investors in the UK important rights consistent with US legal principles and practice, while ensuring that UK investors in the United States are not accorded greater substantive rights than domestic investors. So despite Johnson saying we're not going to be a rule taker, what that's saying is actually what you're going to do is you're going to defer to US laws. So any laws that you have that don't seem quite consistent, you're going to change them so that they are consistent with US law. In addition, US investors are going to get greater rights in the UK, but UK investors are not going to get greater rights in the US. I mean, that small paragraph tells the entire story of this whole document, really, in a crystal clear point. The entire deal is about American goods being able to be traded in UK markets without any restrictions. Those restrictions could be tariffs, regulations, standards. Makes no difference. They're all gone. Remove all the barriers to trade. However, the UK products that we wish to trade in the US market will be subject to all of their barriers in order to stop them competing with American products. And that's before even getting onto the section that means we have to favour American products over others. We heard the worst excess of this last year with NHS medicine. So the NHS would be forced to buy all medicines from US pharmaceutical companies, where a US pharmaceutical company produces it, at whatever inflated price they deem fit, over the equivalent and cheaper products from the EU. So there'll be no market forces there. There's no, oh, that's too expensive, I'm going to buy it here. It's like, no, you've got to buy it from us. But you've just put up your prices, you're costing 10 times as much as over there. Yeah, you've got to buy it from us. And that's all there is to it. And that will be over cheaper products in the EU, but also that are produced within the UK. So the UK manufacturing of pharmaceuticals goes under as well. And it baffled me how many people tried to deny that this was the case when this was talked about before the general election. You know, the records of the meetings were leaked last year and people tried to claim that they weren't real. Well, not only are they real, no one denied that. These documents were from the British government. We didn't need the US document leaking because they put it online. They have no problems being open and honest about what they want. And there is no room for negotiation here from the part of view of the UK. The powerful lobby groups in America, whether it be the agricultural lobby, pharmaceutical lobby, whoever, will insist upon it. So Boris Johnson basically has three choices. One, he can just sign it immediately. It's not changing. Though it can't take effect until we've actually left the EU properly, you know, the customs union, the single market, because until then we're locked into EU standards and this deal is unimplementable. Two, he can pretend to negotiate it for a little bit and then just sign it when he thinks a suitable passage of time has passed, maybe he can say he's gained some concessions. You know, maybe the US president will give him a gift hamper of Twinkies or something. 3, he can actually just deal with the EU and other countries and do what's best for the UK. Because the US is doing what's best for the US. That's what you would expect them to do. And that's what you'll expect every other nation and trading bloc to do as well. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.